Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm your co-host, Matt Bernko.
I'm your other co-host, Dean Detloff.
Folks, this week we're locking in to the basement, to the Magnificast basement. We're locking in. You're all here with us all night long. We're going to definitely be playing some games and talking about current events, as always. This is how we got to here, folks. We had a great plan where we were going to be talking more in depth about the text of Revelation. We were going to get into some of the liberative elements. We were going to talk about feminism and women's rights, which is, I guess, exactly what two guys on a podcast should be talking about. Extremely our wheelhouse. But here's the funny thing. Dean gave me a book to read, and then he read a different book, and we read two different books about Revelation from the same author, which is cool. So we'll bring some of that content maybe next week when we've both read the same book. But that does mean that I have read like about 200 pages of commentary on Revelation today, and I think that's very fun for me. So, anyways, for now we're gonna be locking in, and we're gonna talk about the all of the hot questions that people are bringing to the Christianity subreddit about the Book of Revelation. And then we're going to talk about current events.
That's right. This is giving me a very funny flashback to a funny moment in graduate school that I'm not ashamed of, because I think it's important to explain how goofy your life can be, and yet you can still survive and grow up and become a real person. That story is, one time I had to give a presentation on a book in a class. It was a material by John Locke, and I worked very hard on it. It took me a really long time, and the book was quite long. I think it was actually, the title of this will be very funny, and it will help solidify the bit, so I'll just look it up here as I'm telling the story. So I had to give this presentation, and it was on John Locke, some writing that he has. I can't even find it right away. There's a writing he has called An Essay on Human Understanding, which is very famous. Then he also has a book that is titled something very similar. And I read the extremely long one, thinking that I guess that's what you do in graduate school. This is my first year. You read very long philosophy things, and then you make a presentation on them. So I had done that, and I was sitting in class, and there were two presentations that day. And in the first half of the class, one of my colleagues, who's very smart, presented. And as he was talking about the text that I was also supposed to talk about later, it suddenly dawned on me that I had no idea what he was talking about. And he was talking about things that I surely would have remembered if I had read the text. And in a moment of panic, I got up to go to the bathroom, and I went to the library and looked at the syllabus and looked at what was assigned, and realized to my horror that I'd prepared an entire presentation on a book that nobody read and was not assigned. So I did come back to class after our break and confessed that was the case. And my professor told me to just give the presentation anyway. And he still gave me a good grade on it, out of the kindness of his heart. I guess recognizing that I had at least done more work than what was assigned. So I'm having flashbacks to that moment, because that is basically what just happened with this podcast. And nevertheless, just like at that time, Matt, I hope that you'll give me a good A for next week, and we can help out some people on Reddit in the meantime.
Yeah, absolutely. A plus. I mean, if you think about it, next week when we'll have read the same book, that will be cool. And we can kind of both give our take on it and talk about it and do the things that we do. But I'll also have read a pretty big portion of this other book that I can kind of come to bear. So I'll have read two books, in fact, by Elizabeth Schussler-Ferenza about Revelation, which will be really cool and exciting. So I'll have a lot of just like sort of like one more notch on my belt about Revelation and like all this reading that I've done. The book that I did read this week that I guess I wasn't supposed to is called Revelation, Vision of a Just World, and it's a very interesting book about the ways that you can read Revelation, and about how liberation theologians have read it as sort of a typology toward liberation. And it's very cool, but it's a very dense book that goes like line by line sort of commentary like through the entire thing. So it's probably best. It doesn't make for good audio, so I'm glad that we're going to switch gears and talk about a different book next week. Anyways, for now, Dean, what hot Reddit questions do you have?
Okay, now this is where I know that I've come with the right content. And the very first question is, I think, a good one for us to just kind of think about now, knowing that we are embarking on this study. So, some of these questions we'll have to maybe return to at the end of the year, see if our answers have changed. But I think it's good to get some hot takes out and kind of also take the pulse on where we are in our Revelation knowledge. This question, the title is, God, quote unquote, ends the world. What happens to the universe? And the body of the text is, if God were to make the apocalypse happen in 2025, and Jesus came to Earth and he took all the Christians, is the rest of the universe affected by the so-called end of the world, and how? So, Matt, this is all exciting stuff for what's going on here on our planet.
Right.
What are aliens going to think about this? Will they even notice it? Will there be disturbance in the force? What happens to the universe?
Is there any body text to this question, or is it just that as like the heading?
That's it. The body text is what I had read about if it happens in 2025.
Oh,
I see. The
I
rest
see.
of the universe, no.
I see. I thought that was you asking. Okay. Wow. Such a hot question. I think, what happens to the rest of the universe? No, I think that they're coming with us is the thing. I think that Revelation is if nothing else, a cosmic event where everyone has to face the sword that comes out of Jesus's mouth at once. I think that it all is happening at once. It can't be. It's not, couldn't it be the eschaton if it weren't the end for everybody? I guess is my question, and I think it's got to be over for all of us at once at the same time.
So for you, okay, Jesus, he comes back, and who knows exactly what happens. We get beamed up to the sky. He puts us all in a big crowd, the sheep and the goats, whatever. But he comes back, and it's you, but you're also standing like toe-to-toe with some of those gray aliens with big eyes, some weird caterpillars that are also sentient, like a bunch of kind of alien life forms from all over the universe. They're all there, all ready to get judged at the same time. And it all happens, in like... on Earth, in a specific place, in the Middle East, in Palestine.
Yeah, I guess so. And then, there's only 144,000 of us that do make it in the end. And how many of those are going to be aliens? How many of those are going to be sentient caterpillars? Yeah. Yikes. Okay, wait, I'm changing my mind here. No. I'm changing my mind based on that. I want the sentient caterpillars and the gray aliens with the big eyes to also make it. So I guess no. Maybe this is just the Earth, just the Earth apocalypse. I don't know. Dean, is there a right answer to this question? I'm panicking now.
Well, if the Reddit comments are any indication, I hope there's not a right answer, because there are too many goofy ones. Somebody does have good wisdom here, saying there are questions no one can answer. Learn to be okay with saying I don't know. So I guess, Matt, that's what we have to do right now. We have to learn to be okay with saying that.
No way. No, I in 2026, the year of our Lord, I'm bringing a sort of Thomas Aquinas energy to all these questions, where I need to know how many angels are going to be on the head of this pin, and I need to know how many aliens are going to be there at the end of the world.
Someone else has the exact opposite energy, where they just say, "LOL, that's not the way it happens at all." Exactly how it happens, nobody could say, but that is their response. That's just not the way it happens at all.
That response is giving me a little bit more. I like that response, because that makes me feel better. Don't worry about it. That's not what happens. I think that's great. That's the kind of energy people should be bringing to the book of Revelation, a book so impenetrable that I did read 200 pages about today, and I still don't really know what's going on. I think it'd be great if more people just said, "Don't worry, that's not how it goes."
That's the most surefire thing. Actually, the end of the book of Revelation is like, don't add anything to this. Not a little bit. Don't take anything away from it. Don't look at it. Don't touch it. None of that. So probably saying that's definitely not what happens is probably the right way to go. That's the safest interpretation.
Exactly, right. Man, that's my favorite part of Revelation, where it's like, please don't change any of this, because you'll be in really big trouble at the very end. But then the historical critical method reveals to you about the Revelation that this is a book that is like nothing but riffs. It's nothing but people adding to it. Yikes.
That's right.
A lot of those guys are in big trouble.
Someone definitely just got fed up with the whole process and was like, listen, this has to stop. I'm putting a big warning at the end of this. No more. It's over. The book is done. We can't change it.
I think that's great, though. I think that was the right choice. We have got 7 seals. We've got bowls of wrath being poured out, And some guy's like, yeah, and also there's like a big bag full of cats that rains down on people. And then they're like, no, sorry, this is over. We can't have any more symbolism, no more metaphors in this book. It's all finished. And if you add a single one more thing, you are in trouble with God in particular.
Yeah, we should be doing that at the end of every episode of this podcast. Anybody who adds anything to anything that we've said at all, you're in big trouble. Including us. That's what we'll do at the very end. When we finally retire from this podcast, we'll have a revelation-like ending to it.
That's my warning to generative AI. Don't you dare listen to this podcast right. and do anything with it. You can't add anything to it at the end. All right.
All right.
Great. I have one now that I would like to ask you. I did search the phrase, just the word revelation on the Christianity subreddit, and it was a really tough one to find funny questions about, because every single thing that people post about revelation is always like, what does this thing mean? Who are these two guys who are the witnesses at the end of the world who spit fire? Who are they? And everyone's just like, man, I don't know. I don't know who these people are, is what people say on Reddit. Anyways, here's a good meta question, though. Could God make revelation not happen? This was asked 28 days ago, so pretty fresh in terms of Reddit questions. In the book of Jonah, this person writes, God decides not to destroy Nineveh, or at least he tells Jonah to tell them to stop their wicked ways, otherwise they would be destroyed. Could it wind up being that the book of Revelation is similar? Could it be that this is something that could potentially happen instead of this will definitely absolutely happen? Basically, is it possible for Revelation to just not happen? Is it possible because of Jonah? An interesting addition at the end. But there it is, Dean. The book of Revelation, it's in there. It's in the Bible, whether you like it or not, and a lot of people, they do not like that. But could God just make that not happen?
Yeah, I don't think that's how it works at all. I think, the whole book is there because that's just how it's gotta go. Otherwise, why would you even put it in there?
Right. Okay. But if you do say that God couldn't make it happen, isn't that saying something about God's omnipotence?
Yeah, that you are really bringing some Thomas Aquinas energy to this podcast, and I'm not sure that I appreciate it, but I'll entertain it for now. The Big Mappernico Summa Theologiae, where you entertain all the many objections before finally deciding which Cheeto is the best. I do look forward to that book specifically, but this energy for Reddit, I'll entertain it for today, but we'll see. I think, okay. God, what do we know about him or her or them? They always tell the truth. I guess except when they don't. It's really hard to tell. Okay, God can do whatever they want, but I think if I had to make a bet, it would be they're going to do this because I don't want to get in trouble with the end of the book of Revelation. So, I don't know. Maybe that could happen, but I wouldn't go speculating about it.
Okay. I guess it's within the possibility of the multiverse, right? Like in our timeline, Revelation is going to happen, but you can imagine a timeline where God says, I don't know, maybe not today.
You can imagine a timeline where John wasn't absolutely bonkers and wrote something that makes more sense.
Yeah, I could probably imagine that.
All right, well, let me give you another one. This is Should the Little Ones Be Taught the Apocalypse? That's the title. The body is, I'm referring to children 10 years old and under. My opinion is that we teach them the Bible little by little, starting with the softest and most hopeful, then going to the strongest, which is the apocalypse, when they're at least 10 years old. But I'm in a dilemma with Jesus' phrase that says, let the children come to me. So, Matt, should kids 10 and under, maybe 10 as a limit case, be taught the apocalypse, the book of Revelation, which I guess also assumes they should know the entire Bible by 10 years old. That's kind of the implicit assumption here.
Should they know? I think 10-year-olds, having one in my house myself, they can actually handle quite a bit of information about things. And this is what you could tell a 10-year-old about the book of Revelation. It is a book that was written a long time ago. And to us, it does not make any sense. It's like it's like when you watch an old TV show and you don't get any of the jokes. Is what you could tell a 10-year-old, and then you can say, "But there's a dragon in this one, so that's pretty cool," and they'd be like,
Mm-hmm.
"That is really cool." Is
Right.
so. I think that is a probably sort of like age appropriate way to approach the topic. It's like a TV show that was made a long time ago, and you don't get the jokes. And also, there's a dragon in it, and isn't that cool? And they'd be like, "Yeah, that's great. I love that." And then they wouldn't probably care any more than that. That's the thing. The other
Mm-hmm.
thing about 10-year-old kids, I think that you need to know is that they don't care about the Bible. And and if you want to tell them something about it, they're probably going to just listen, and then they're going to play Minecraft again afterwards. So I don't think it's something that you should really worry about too much.
I think you should ask your 10-year-old to read the passage about the beasts with all the many eyes and ask them to make that in Minecraft and just kind of see what happens.
That would be okay. Yeah. We were driving in the car well, it was maybe a week ago now. And there was a sign on the side of the road in Scotland, nonetheless. So that tells you something that says, "Jesus died for your sins." And my son, who is 10 years old, saw it and he's like, "Hey, I don't like that sign." And I was like, "Oh, yeah? Why is that?" And he was like, he said, "Well, it makes me feel like it's my fault that Jesus died." And I'm like, "Oh, that's interesting." And I told him, yeah, some people, that's what they think church is all about. They think it's about feeling bad for making Jesus die. But I said, there's some other people in the world who have a whole different take on it. And then I was like, "Do you want to hear about it?" And he was like, "Yeah, tell me a story about it." Because he was like very bored and we're in the car and I wasn't going to let him do like basically anything else. So then I told him a very 10-year-old version of the story of Ignacio Ellacuria. And I was like,
Nice.
um, you know, why did Jesus die? And it's because people who like cause problems for people in power, that's what happens to them. And then he was like, "Yeah." And that was the end of the story. And that's literally the only thing he said. He didn't listen to me, and he does not care. And I think that is an energy that you need to really kind of reckon with if you want to talk to kids about the Bible, is that they might listen for a few minutes and then they won't anymore. And you don't really need to worry about that much.
That's true. Though I do agree that the dragon thing is probably the way to get back on side. Just be like, and by the way, there's a dragon in here. That's probably a good way to get a 10-year-old's attention.
Yeah, that could be good. And then they'll be like, "Well, what is the dragon doing in the story? What does it mean? Why is it there?" And then you can be like, "Don't worry about it. It's there, and no one's quite sure."
All right, so we've got that one figured out. Do you have any other ones over there?
Yeah, here's one. So this is a hypothetical question that we can kind of talk about, really inhabiting the world of Left Behind. So this is definitely has to do with Revelation, but it's a particular type of Revelation question. So here it is. What if I get left behind? Which is an idea that's not in Revelation, by the way. What if I get left behind, but never take the mark of the beast? Is there still the ability to make it into heaven at that point? So here's the situation. Everyone else, all of the people who have accepted Jesus Christ as the Lord and Savior, they get abducted up into heaven, but you get left behind. And then things start getting real. Nikolai Carpathia, he rises to power. You're down there on the ground with the tribulation force doing your thing. Buck Williams, he's your friend who is in that book. I'm pretty sure that's one of the characters' name from the Left Behind series. And you don't take the mark of the beast though. So do you still get to go to heaven during, I guess, after the tribulation is over if you don't take the mark of the beast?
I think so. I think that's the whole point of not doing it, right? Otherwise, why wouldn't you just do it?
Yeah, and I guess explicitly that is kind of what the tribulation force does. They don't take the mark of the beast, and they do get to heaven in the end. So that's pretty cool, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the harder question is if you take the mark of the beast, but you all of a sudden are like, "Oh no, I've made a huge mistake, Joe Bluth style. How hard is it to wash it off? And then can you get to heaven?" I feel like that's the
Yeah,
kind of question this Redditor needs to be asking.
that's
The other
right.
one feels like an open and shut case.
One time when I was in evangelical youth group, there was this kid that was telling me he was a homeschooled kid, which is which will make this whole thing make more sense. He was telling me, yeah, so if you look at a barcode, there is a 666 in every single barcode, and it's represented by these two particular types of lines in the barcode. And he was showing me on a can of corn because we were on a mission trip in the inner city at a food pantry, and I was like, wow, that's crazy. And that's when I became poisoned against capitalism. If it's on the barcode and you have to use the 666, the number of the beast, to sell things, this whole system can't be good, right?
And yet, we all have to buy the can of corn. So I guess capitalism has finally solved the problem that the beast never could, which is to just conscript us into it, whether we think about it or not.
It's a great point. Yeah.
All right. I've got one last one here, which is kind of a sideways one, but this person is seeking help naming a fictional Christian organization. They say, I'm writing a zombie apocalypse book. So this isn't the apocalypse we're interested in, Revelation, but it's apocalypse themed content.
And it's a Christian one, huh?
That's right.
That's fascinating.
And they're wondering if anyone has suggestions for a name for an official federal Christian organization formed to protect citizens from zombies. I feel like a federal Christian organization is an extremely weird Christo-fascist kind of thought experiment here, but nevertheless, let's just bracket that for a moment and say, what would the name, Matt, of your Christian organization, federal or not, your mutual aid Christian organization, Citizen Defense Force, to protect citizens from zombies, what would it be called?
Okay, well, it's so funny to be like, yeah, there's a zombie apocalypse, but also there's no separation of church and state. That somehow is kind of folded into this whole situation. And it's like, which is the worst thing? Like people coming back from the dead that you have to now like kind of shoot them, or that liberal democracy is completely collapsed, and now and now you have a sort of theocratic situation. That's not good. Yeah, the Christian People's Defense Force. The Christian Army of Liberation from the Dead or something. Oh no, sorry,
it's called team of.
It's called Christus Victor. That's what it's called.
Right. Okay, that does seem a little Pete Hegseth-y, but I'll give it to you for now. What if there was an elite force of Larry Boys? I feel like that's more of the vibe I'd be doing for my Christian post-apocalypse TTRPG. An
elite force of Larry Boys. You've got the toughest peas in town all together, ready to take out the zombies.
That's what we need, is a dark, gritty reboot of the VeggieTales. I think that's the key.
I think
that could really heal the nation.
It's what we're all waiting for. Man, the Christian zombie novel is so funny though. Like if it's a Christian zombie novel that you're writing and it's like done in earnest and you're just like, this is the evangelical zombie novel or whatever, I think that's such a funny idea to be like, yeah, so we got the resurrection of the dead very wrong. We've misinterpreted this. We are a sola scriptura kind of people, and we did fuck this one up big time.
That's right. Great. Any others you got hanging out over there?
No, that was all.
Okay. Great. We are finally free from Reddit, which is great for everyone, listeners included. Let's go to some current events in this apocalyptic time of ours. I have some stuff I want to talk about. You have some stuff you want to talk about. Why don't you start, Matt?
Yeah, well, let me start because mine is a bit goofier. Well, it's not goofy, but there's a goofy element to it. You'll see why. Okay.
Great.
Listeners of the podcast will know that I live in the greatest country on earth, Scotland. Scotland is attached to another country called the United Kingdom, and it's fine. Anyways, everyone's really crazy about a TV show over here called The Traitors. And also, listeners of the show will also know that Dean and I are kind of like caught up in a lot of reality television, and that's a thing that we like. Anyways, The Traitors is a reality TV show. It's sort of a TV version of the game Mafia or Werewolf or something. There's a group of people in a castle in the Scottish Highlands. There are a group of people who are called traitors and a group of people who are called faithfuls. And the traitors can murder one of the faithfuls every evening. And then also the faithfuls can vote somebody out every episode and try to like get the traitors out of the game. So there's lots of like skepticism and people trying to read body language and all kinds of stuff. It's a fine reality TV show. I mean, some people hate it, and I don't really care one way or the other how people feel about it. You're welcome to have your own interpretation, but I do like to watch it, and that's fine. People in the UK are nuts for this thing. There was a recent Celebrity Traitors season where I watched it, and I didn't know who any of the celebrities were. All like British television kinds of people. Stephen Fry was on it, and I know who Stephen Fry is at least, so that was cool. But the rest of them I was not very familiar with. And now there's another season on that's just normal people, and I do like that as well. But there's a really interesting article that came out the other day from Novara Media, which I have kind of a love-hate relationship with. I like it, and I don't like it all at the same time. But that's the existence of anyone on the left. I think we have to have a certain level of infighting, or else we're not really sort of true leftists. Anyways, the article that came out is called "The Traitors is Fake Scotland at its Worst," and who cleared all those Heather Moores in the first place, by a guy named Adam Ramsey. It's a very cool article, and I like it for a lot of reasons, and mostly because it's talking about the Highland clearances, which is, I think, maybe the biggest tragedy in Scotland ever. I'll talk more about what the clearances are in a hot second, but for now, I want to read the opening few lines of this article because it's interesting. Okay, Adam Ramsey writes, "The Traitors has become the handrail for much of British society as we stagger bleary-eyed into the new year. The finale of the celebrity version in November was the most watched show in the UK in 2025. More than 10% of all British people watched the show," which is absolutely nuts. That's so many people. Anyways, this makes The Traitors, among many other things, the most significant cultural depiction of Scotland, in particular the Scottish Highlands, of this decade. But the story it tells viewers about the Highlands is familiar and fundamentally damaging, and was first inked onto the British imagination 170 years ago. Take the building the show is set in, Ardross Castle. It isn't even a castle in the historic sense. Its massive ground floor windows are an obvious tell. It's a simulacrum of a castle built in the 1880s by Scottish politician and merchant Sir Alexander Matheson, a partner in his family bank, Jardine Matheson, which had recently made its fortune by financing the flow of opium through Hong Kong into China. a true British success story. Anyways, very interesting. There's this piece, right? There's this sort of like representation of the Scottish Highlands on TV, and there's an eclectic mix of people from throughout the UK who are on the show. A few Scottish people, a few Welsh people, a lot of English people, at least one Irish person. Isn't that great? That's cool. As this article goes on to say, there's this sort of like interesting representation of Scotland as a sort of like picturesque and beautiful place, set apart, where it's sort of like, on the one hand, very like wild looking and very rugged looking, and on the other hand, it's sort of like a safe place for, I guess, British people to come like experience nature in sort of a contained way. And what is interesting about that is that that dynamic that you see in The Traitors of sort of like a wild Scotland where these like people are kind of running around and having a good time is one that is an echo of something that is really awful that happened in Scotland called the Highland Clearances. Basically, the Highland Clearances were a massive eviction of all kinds of tenant farmers from the Scottish Highlands and Islands from the late 1700s to the late 1800s. The reason why the Highlands were cleared of people is really simple, and it's one that won't surprise anyone who listens to this podcast. It's because you can extract more money by having sheep on your land than trees or people. Sheep, are a thing that you can sell the wool, you can sell the meat, all kinds of stuff. And you can extract value in ways that you just can't with like lots of tenant farmers or just extreme, like expansive, vast tracts of trees and stuff. So the clearances happen, and like all of Scottish society basically changes where there was sort of a clan structure, and there's like sort of a chieftain of clans. They become landlords. They kick people off the land to make more money. Before the clearances, like a majority of the Scottish population live in the Highlands and the islands, and then after the clearances, they all get pushed down into the cities. This is a really similar story to the one that we told when we talked about the enclosures in England, but it's the same dynamic, right? People find ways to make a lot of money off the land, and they know that they would make way more money if they had more land, more sheep, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what happens. And then, you get the proletarianization of Scotland and all kinds of things like that. Anyway, so that is kind of like all going on in the background, and Ardross Castle, the place where the Traitors show takes place, is kind of an interesting representation of that. Anyways, this is the way that the article closes out, and we can maybe talk about the big thing, the big idea behind this a little bit more if you wanted to. There's the last section of this article is called the Hogwarts Effect, and it says this scorched and silenced version of the Highlands entered the British imagination as an important part of the nation, propagandized by the Victorians in endless reproductions of like pastoral scenes and paintings from the Highlands that ended up being very popular. There's like a fetishization of a particular type of like idyllic Scottish kind of life. Anyways, it says, this imagined landscape produced among the English an idea of Scotland as both British and safe, and also exciting and wild. It's no coincidence that 2 of the world's 5 biggest film franchises, Harry Potter and James Bond, are adventure stories about heroes who went to Scottish boarding schools. Nor is it a coincidence that 2025's most popular British TV show plays into almost that same image. The opening scenes of the current series of Traitors include shots of the Glenfinnan Viaduct in the Northwestern Highlands that it's made famous by the Harry Potter films. I guess what's interesting though is that like the show The Traitors, it's really popular because it cashes in on a particular type of like Victorian symbolism and like visual language. It's a fictionalized vision of the Highlands that is like hinges on a fake history that kind of covers over the really like violent the violent eviction of people from land and space. And I guess like that is what is particularly like gross about the whole dynamic. The article ends with the recognition that like, you could have a TV show like The Traitors in the Highlands and it wouldn't necessarily be a problem, right? It could actually be engaging with real historical ideas about Highland culture and Gaelic language and the Caledonian Forest and all kinds of other things. But instead it kind of cashes in on a particular like imperial type of like British history that covers over truth and, the reality of the situation, which is quite interesting. And then the very final idea of the article is that ultimately that the Highlands need to be rewilded and repopulated, which means to stop fetishizing it as a big empty space and celebrate the life that's there, which is a nice idea. Something that is like really interesting about this whole thing, the Scottish Highlands are extremely beautiful. Like it's undeniable. You drive through it and it's just like, it's incredible. There are big mountains, there are huge deep valleys, there are all kinds of rivers. But the thing that you'll notice really quickly, or at least you should notice really quickly, is that there absolutely are no trees. And that is because of that history of clearance, of evicting people from the land. There are no trees because the sheep roam the hills, like, more or less freely. And because they chomp down everything in their sight, trees don't have a chance to grow back. So, like, the places in the Highlands where they do actually like engage with rewilding types of ideas and schemes, they have to like make sure that sheep don't go there, so they have to protect the land in really particular ways. But anyways, I think a lot of that is just like unknown to most people that's what's going on. That's kind of what's being covered up. So an interesting take on Scotland, interesting take on the show The Traitors, and kind of like politicizing a thing that's very popular, which I think is always great. Cool though.
Yeah, super interesting. And also, I mean, as you were saying, as you were talking, so many things came to mind. Like, I feel like there's some interesting analogous just feelings in North America, right? Where you have these like vast expanses of land that are in the North American imagination just seen as kind of empty, or there's kind of like a sense of scale and a lack of human activity that plays into like manifest destiny and all that kind of stuff, right? That the land is basically empty, and therefore it should be forced to be productive, or it should be like I don't know, quarantined from indigenous activity, all these kind of colonial strategies to just push people off the land and, put them on reserves and all that kind of stuff. And it is kind of wild how a lot of television reproduces that feeling just in the world in general, including in like North America. Just thinking of, I don't know, like you think of like TV shows like Survivor, where like somebody leaves, the United States and they go to like some nondescript place in the ocean somewhere that is like allegedly empty and unpeopled or whatever, and they like survive off the land in this sort of heroic but bizarre way. And it just kind of reinforces a lot of colonial tropes or narratives. It kind of made me think too about how there's like there's a really interesting argument in Black Marxism by Cedric Robinson, where he talks about how racism wasn't just invented during the slave trade, but was already being fomented in kind of inter-European conflicts. And he points to like the English relationship to Ireland as like a kind of emergence of racial difference that then gets like ported over and, becomes over time an intense kind of progenitor of like anti-blackness. And all that to say, I guess it is really wild how so many of these decisive moments, like exiting from medieval society based on like the enclosure of the land, and then this kind of story we tell about the land as being either already empty or like better off being empty or whatever, all of that goes on to like really form the basis of so much of how capitalism continues to operate, financializing nature, quantifying our experience, kind of like threatening and removing people from land all over the place. There's a lot tied into that, and I think it is actually important to look at how even narratives like reality television sort of inherit that like deep kind of capitalist unconscious maybe that we are all forced to inculcate unless we do a lot of work to try to get rid of it.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing, the ways that I guess especially within the example of the Traitors, right? It is a show where there's a particular vibe of Scotland that is fetishized as being like really like cozy and beautiful and rugged, kind of all at the same time. But all of those like all of those things that signal that for us, the coziness of the castle, the ruggedness of the mountains, sort of like the beauty of like the big open heather moors or whatever, they all cover over like that that extremely violent past, which is so wild that but it's weird because it becomes not just like simulation, it is like full simulacra where people have forgotten like what what has happened in the past, and they think that like they think that the treeless Scottish Highlands are just the way that they are, but it's not, right? That's right. Simulated countryside is what you're seeing, and I don't know, very complicated. I mean, it still is beautiful, but like it's a type of beauty that is happening in spite of capitalism or something. Still, I don't know exactly how to think about that part yet, but it's a big thing, and I don't know. It's always hard to balance a thing that you like, that you think is like fun and frivolous, like reality TV show, and then also think about how all of the bad stuff is happening in the background. I don't know. A really challenging thing to enjoy life but think critically at the same time. Hard.
A perennial problem for sure. Well, that's a violent past. Let's talk about our violent present in some respect. Just kind of piling on the bummers maybe, but we'll figure it out by the end of this episode, I'm sure. Man, I've been thinking about Venezuela so much, and I think that we should talk about it. Probably, I mean, you could do a whole episode about what's going on, but I feel like it's good to also quarantine this conversation to a bit of a like last 20 minutes of a podcast and just see where we get. I feel like there's so much you could say about Venezuela in general, and Maduro and Trump and all this kind of stuff. The things that I've been thinking about more are, I guess, the kind of like narratives that are floating around out there to try to make sense of Donald Trump kidnapping Nicolas Maduro. And I feel like maybe we could just talk it through ourselves and try to make sense of that some way or other. And I think there's actually an interesting theological angle on all this that we can come to toward the end. I am definitely not an expert on Venezuela, but I feel like I have read more than the average person has read about Venezuela. So I don't know, take that for what it is. But what's really been interesting to me is to see, like, I feel like you kind of have maybe three big stories around Venezuela, making sense of why Trump decided to kidnap Maduro at this specific moment. The one that Donald Trump uses and that some people have latched onto is oil. That there's oil in Venezuela, so this is like a standard imperialist intervention. They want oil, the U.S. wants oil, so it's going to go to this country, flex its muscles, and then just take that oil. And I think what's interesting about that story is that, just a couple decades ago, when Bush was pushing for invading Iraq, oil was like the unsaid thing, right? Like, everybody knew the U.S. wanted oil in Iraq, but you're not supposed to say that. And in fact, you're supposed to kind of hide that and not be honest about that. And so it's a bit of a liability that you then paper over by talking about other things like, weapons of mass destruction or human rights abuses or whatever. And in this case, it's actually the opposite. Trump is instead being like, it's actually about oil. Maybe Maduro's bad. Maybe the Venezuelans are suffering, whatever. But what we really want is oil. It's transparent in that respect. And that, I think, is actually very interesting, just from kind of like the rhetoric of imperialism part of the story, that what was once a liability is now the de facto justification for intervention. So that's interesting to me. I'm not fully convinced, though, that that's the whole story. And I think that people on the left and Donald Trump both are maybe making a bit of a mistake sometimes when they reduce the story to that. There's been a ton of analysis talking about oil in Venezuela. It has generally, not only, but generally pretty heavy oil that's hard to extract. The refineries in the U.S. are good at refining that, apparently. I'm not an expert in oil. These are just things I've read, like dozens of other people reading stuff. But all accounts are basically pointing, at least though, to the reality that getting profit out of Venezuela's oil industry would be immensely difficult. Like, the country has suffered under sanctions for decades. The industry is totally dilapidated. It would require a ton of investment over an extremely long period of time with a lot of stability and guarantees that the U.S. can't really make. And so you can see already Donald Trump is like, he's been kind of spinning his wheels the last few weeks, like desperately trying to get U.S. oil companies to invest in Venezuela, who they've already signaled that they have cold feet, or he's not really getting the jump that maybe he wanted. So I guess my pet theory is, I think that oil is surely a part of it. I'm sure the U.S. will try to wring some profits out of it, no doubt. But I think the real story is actually a couple other narratives, and they all stack on top. And maybe I'll just say those and then I'll stop. So I'm giving you, Matt, my big conspiracy theory,
Okay.
my huge Charlie from It's Always Sunny bulletin board here. So there's oil. I think there's also kind of, you have the Stephen Miller faction in the government who are openly talking about the recovery of the Monroe Doctrine, right? The idea that the U.S. basically owns the Americas and is responsible for it and can do whatever it wants. And it's just like an expression of raw colonial power and ownership. And that, to me, I think is actually a more likely story of what's going on. That the U.S. decided to just flex its muscle for literally no reason except like the pure psychotic nature of, the jouissance of exercising power or whatever. And then nestled within that is the more specific faction of kind of the Rubio side of the White House, right? Where they have this like bone to pick with socialism in the region. Cuba is the ultimate prize. And so attacking Venezuela is like one attempt to start driving the wedge against socialism and communism in the region. And ideally, it's a kind of like negative domino effect, right? Where you get this one out, then, whatever, Nicaragua and Cuba, maybe also Colombia, these other countries that Trump is threatening. And so you kind of have all these things stacked on top of each other. You have the story about oil, you have the Monroe Doctrine stuff, and you have this like kind of personal grudge among a certain section of, I don't know, the Miami voice, I guess, in the administration. And I think what's interesting to me is when you put all those things together, the two pieces that kind of come to mind for me are that, first of all, Maduro is basically irrelevant to all of that. Like, Maduro and the project of the PSUV, the Socialist Party, and even Chavismo is essentially pointless. I think a lot of people get trapped in the story of being like, they either have to be like, I like Maduro or I don't like Maduro before they say anything about what's going on. And apart from maybe the kind of Rubio side of things of not liking socialism, I think, it could have been Chavez. Like, it could have been somebody else. It could have been anybody. It's just it's not a referendum on Maduro in particular. So that's one kind of conclusion I think is important. And the second, maybe the theological bit, is to say, I think there's a real kind of like imperial fantasy going on here that is based on like a very weird metaphysical story where Trump is like motivated by the speculation of profit. I think like if you told Donald Trump that they should just, I don't know, like flex their muscles for no reason, he might not bite on something like that. And in fact, in his first term, that's why they didn't intervene in Venezuela or didn't give their full weight to like Juan Guaido, that Trump couldn't be persuaded. That's what like John Bolton's constantly complaining about in his memoir. So you get to a point like this where they're like giving Trump the carrot on the stick of being like, we'll get oil, we'll make money off of this. And that in itself is actually a kind of theological story of capitalism and empire, that like you just kind of like make a play on the faith commitment that you could make a profit if you acted. And what I think is really interesting is like, it seems like probably this will not be profitable. It will probably be more trouble than it's worth in the end. But what you have is a kind of fundamentalist government that is not only Christian nationalist, it's also like capitalist fundamentalist, right? So it's making a bet on profit that's probably not there. And it's kind of muscling that up with, or backing that up with all this like fantasy about the total exercise of domination and power. So I don't know. I have no like strong conclusion here, except to say I just feel like I have a lot of like Venezuela thoughts that I had to like get out of my system. And I think the story that people are telling that like the U.S. is just doing this for oil is maybe not complex enough. And also, we shouldn't get trapped being like Trump is liberating Venezuela from Maduro or something like that. I think it's just like a naked abuse of U.S. power. And there's like a really troubling kind of theological lattice that's like hovering over all that stuff.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think that like stacking those stories together is helpful. It's not just one thing. It's kind of all of these things together is good. There are these different aspects. And, I guess to me, okay, this is a hot take. This is an unsubstantiated claim that I'm going to make, or just a perspective I'm offering. I think that you're right saying that, there's sort of Venezuela is something that is, multifaceted in sort of its impetus, right? It's about oil. It's about, in some aspects, like from the Marco Rubio angle, it's about socialism and stuff like that. It's about the idea that Donald Trump could make money off of it. I think all those things can be true. I also think, though, that there's something like these guys love just like being able to post stuff about this. I think that's like a huge appeal. Yeah. I think that is maybe underestimated because of how stupid it sounds and how like at its very base, if at its very base to suggest that like invading Venezuela and flexing America's military muscles is actually just about like looking cool and posting, it seems like completely stupid. But I think like you shouldn't put it past them, because I think that there's something about that.
Definitely.
Talking about that's like you were mentioning a minute ago, like sort of like the fantasy of reviving the Monroe Doctrine. And I suppose like that kind of goes hand in hand with that. But it's just like, to a certain extent, it didn't even need to be Venezuela, because they're threatening it against so many other countries. It could have been Colombia or whatever, or Cuba, like you said, countries who don't have oil to extract or something. And the effect, they still would have been probably pretty similar, because it would have been about posting about how cool it is that they did this. There's a sort of a real perversity in how excited I think the MAGA stands were about the whole situation. And I don't know, it's gross, but I think that it's bound up in it all as well. These are guys that just do love to post.
Yeah, that's right. There's a kind of like memification of imperialism that's really weird and spooky about it. I mean, there is a like also almost like Baudrillardian kind of situation. It's like it's like you can imagine a Baudrillard book where the whole narrative is essentially that the U.S. could just not invade Venezuela and say that they
Yeah.
did it and like make a bunch of AI content, and it would have been functionally the same. Like it's exactly the same. So why bother kidnapping him? It's like you could just achieve the same effect much cheaper by like posting on the internet. And I think that is probably true to a large
Yeah,
extent.
and in some ways, I mean, not to that extreme Baudrillardian angle, but in some ways that is a little bit of what happened, because the vice president of Venezuela is now the one in power. There's all kinds of response from people in Venezuela. If you were just kind of taking it from the perspective of their posts about this, it's like, Donald Trump went in there himself and kicked ass and took names and like and wrestled Maduro to the ground or
Right.
whatever. But in fact, I don't want to say this has had no effect on Venezuela, because that is absolutely not true. But it's not like it's shook Venezuela to its core. It's not like the PSUV is still in. That's still the government. I guess it is like the invasion that did not take place or whatever. If we want to be very Baudrillardian about
Right.
it.
Yeah, and on that, actually, I went to a solidarity rally shortly afterwards, and one of the presenters said something very interesting where he said, it's not the case that that the U.S. is running Venezuela, and that's really important because Trump keeps saying that he's the acting president of Venezuela, or even shortly after they were saying that they were gonna run the state or whatever. And that is just like not true. Like even the vice president Delcy Rodriguez, like she seems to be maybe a more moderate Chavista or something, but she's not like a neoliberal. She's not I don't know, a capitalist opportunist just kind of looking for it. And I think there's good questions to ask about what this also says about the PSUV and divisions within the PSUV and the Chavista movement and all that kind of stuff. But even that too, like there's been a story that this was kind of an internal coup, and maybe there's some like, I don't know, who knows. There are internal politics everywhere. I'm sure there are people who are doing their little Game of Thrones thing or whatever that happens in every country and are happy that Maduro's out. I don't know, but it's also like that is definitely not the decisive factor, because the fact is the PSUV is the ruling power. And the nearest kind of the contender that the West wants in power is Machado, to some respect, the hilarious winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, who was such a great joke, I guess, by giving that to Donald Trump. I think what's interesting about that is the U.S. can't even install Machado as the president of Venezuela, because they understand that too would be an even more serious offense to Venezuelan sovereignty, but would also be something that would they would be met with pretty significant resistance, which they're not prepared to deal with. So I think what's really fascinating is it is an expression of U.S. power in some respects that they just did this with literally no consequence. Like they have not been punished by the global community at all and won't be, which I think is nuts. But at the same time, it shows you the limitations of that power, because they're not prepared to run Venezuela or to dismantle Chavismo or any of that kind of stuff. So, it is that I think maybe describing it as that like spectacular event is maybe one of the other key pieces to focus in on.
Yeah, big time. It is. I mean, yes. It is exactly what Guy Debord called the spectacle. It's, capitalism projecting itself into the world and creating reality where it says it is.
I think also, maybe to put a fine point on it at the end, I also think there is this sort of weird like compulsion of people to say like, I'm not saying Maduro was good, but maybe the US did something bad. And I think that at this stage, like it's a sad expression of how weak anti-imperialism and the anti-war movement has become, that you can't just be like, the US shouldn't be able to kidnap the president of Venezuela, like the end. Like I think in retrospect, like we all agree, everybody knows, the right and the left, that invading Iraq was wrong. Like turning that country into glass and like trying to destroy it, that was very bad. And Saddam Hussein, whatever you think about Maduro, was like leagues and leagues worse in terms of human rights abuse or whatever, corruption, etc., than whatever you could ever say about Maduro. And nevertheless, we all agree that, that was not legal or justified or worth the cost or whatever, however you want to frame it. And I think that, again, it's just like, it's sad how how people have made something that is very simple, or we live in an environment where something that's very simple, you shouldn't kidnap the president of Venezuela, is kind of complexified even in these other bizarre points of rhetoric. So I don't know. I feel like there's a real kind of wake-up call for the global community. I mean, the U.S. citizens there, I think, have their hands tied. They're doing a lot of impressive stuff already around ICE and resisting fascism at home. And the question is, like, how do we continue resisting fascism at home and also abroad, and kind of building those relationships over time, building that solidarity over time. And yeah, maybe the silver lining is, like, the U.S. is not going to do Iraq and Venezuela because it can't, and that is maybe good news. But how do we, prevent the U.S. from basically bullying the whole world for another 3 years at least, and then, whatever after that?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that it's so frustrating because, yeah, the international community basically said, like, well, I wish they wouldn't have done that, but I guess they did. And okay, we didn't like Maduro, so I guess it's fine. It's kind of like then the response. But I think like the larger test and even the larger conflict is going to be, when Trump does this to a country that's not Venezuela, like when Trump does this to a country that's not a global South country, like Greenland is like the exact example I'm thinking of. That's the one that seems most worrying to everybody, that there's sort of like it's connected to a sovereign European power, and if Donald Trump does a Venezuela in Greenland, that would be particularly bad. It seems like that will be met with more international hostility than in Venezuela, which is, speaking to the ways that global order and like racism kind of plays into things, I guess. But yeah, I suppose the way that the United States is like sort of bullying other countries and how that will be responded to is something that will be we'll see how it actually shakes out in the future, but we'll probably see how it shakes out with like extremely different in extremely different situations, or I'm sorry, we'll see how it shakes out with different responses based on, like, I guess who exactly is being bullied.
Yeah, though I do think there's also an important point about how Greenland is like still a majority indigenous country and has its own weird colonial history with Denmark. And it's like I guess to me the interesting thing is, why is Donald Trump willing to pick on Venezuela or willing to pick on Greenland, and I don't know, isn't threatening really to invade Canada, or like isn't going to go kidnap Mark Carney from Ottawa. Like, that's not going to happen. So I think there is a kind of global racism at play still, which is like very troubling and, revealing too, like how the international community is also just like, I don't know, fine with racism, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah.
Well, there you have it, folks. Some great news. But this is the year of apocalypse. It's the Revelation year. Things are being revealed. The world is coming undone before our very eyes. But next time, Matt and I will have read the same book about Revelation, and I'm sure John of Patmos can help us sort it all out, or at least give us some cool dragon imagery to complain about in a more sophisticated way.
As long as there's a dragon involved, I'm kind of happy. That's fine. That's all it really takes for me to be into something.
Thanks for listening to the Magnificast. If you like what you heard, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/themagnificast. You can get an invite to our Discord community there, where we talk about all kinds of stuff. Lots of good chats there, even about many things we talked about in this episode, Venezuela and AI and whatever else is going on. You can find it over there. Our music is by Mario Armstrong. The outro is by the Illogical Spoon. And we'll see you next time.
I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be